Okay, welcome back. There always goes. Now this is going to be, call it part 6 if you like, Project Bonneville. It's going to be the forks today. Now in the last video we lowered the shocks at the back. We put the lower shocks on, the TEC bike gas shocks, which are absolutely amazing. They're really great. We've adjusted them by 10 mil of preload now, and I'll come to those in a little while. Now no lowering job on the back end would really be right if you don't do the front as well. You can put 10 mil off the back, that's okay, but to start taking any more than that, you're going to end up kicking the front end up, and that means the forks don't handle correctly. You've slowed down the steering too much. So you really should be lowering the front in line with the back, so the bike comes down as level as possible, so you retain the design dynamics of handling. You will lose a little bit of ground clearance, but what you don't want to lose is that cornering dynamics, the actual geometry of the front end, because when you lower the back end, you kick the front forks out ever so slightly, but it also makes it steer a lot more slowly, changes it, not nice. Also, it looks cool, get the front down as well. Now what we're going to do today is talk about springs. Fork springs. These, I've done one in order that I can show you these. That is the fork spring from your Bonneville SE. It's known as a linear wound spring, and linear simply means they're the straight lines all the way up. There's no progressive wind in that at all. That's one spring rate, one pressure. This, on the other hand, is a progressively wound spring. You've got up to about there, you've got the same wind of spring, but from there upwards you can see that the coils are tighter and closer together. What that does, if you're interested, bit of an egg sucking lesson for you, to suggest whiz this bit forward if it's boring. This little bit of the spring is softer, that's harder. You can press that quite easily with your hand, because that little bit of the spring is really soggy and soft. It's almost like a super soft layer on top of a regular spring, and in this instance it is pretty much on top. These are longer. Now these are the springs from the Thruxton, and I think the Scrambler as well. That's what you've got. So if you've got a Bonneville, if you've got a Thruxton or a Scrambler, you've already got these, so don't go having to buy them. If you've got a Bonneville though, you've got these, and they are a little bit crap, to be honest, and they need to go. But as you can see, these are longer, and that causes a problem because we have an adjuster spacer tube inside the fork which we have to cut down. So let's get this fork leg apart and show you what's inside. This is from the other fork. Right, what I've done, taken the handlebars, I've just taken the clamps out, put a big towel here over the tank to protect it from any tools banging against it, and I've taken the handlebars literally like that, just took them out, laid them over the front of the clock out the way, so we've got lots of access to work. And as I said, I've already done that side. Now the first consideration when taking off your fork cap is it going to spring out and smack you in the forehead? Well, yes, it probably will, but having that I know this particular fork quite well, it won't, because there's not enough pressure in it. And if you're going to do it on a bike that you're not sure about, just put a towel over it. Get an old towel like that, put the tool underneath and the last comes, and just do it like that so it pops into there. A little bit like taking a champagne cork out if you're not sure. Okay, so you get to that bit, and as you can see, it's not, it'll be done, but get your head out the way. Don't stand over the top of it like this undoing it, because you might need new teeth afterwards. It's not funny. And there it is, that just comes off nicely. There's no spring out on this particular bike. So there's a little bit of fork oil going on here, and interestingly enough, it seems that the factory use good old red Dextron oil, which is 10 weight, fantastic, perfect for the job. There's my cap, just put that safe. Next thing to come out, have a little look, there's a spacer. This is a big girt spacer tube, and it looks like a bit of exhaust pipe, so just wipe the oil off it because we need to deal with that. That's the victim today. That's coming under the disc cutter. We're going to lob a lump off that because the new springs are longer by 30 mil, and we're also going to lower the bike, so we're going to take more than 30 mil off that. That's so. Now the next thing you need, grab the torch pen. Can't probably see it from there. There, right by your left hand.
No. Sorry.
It's the thing with the button and the bolts.
Yeah.
Right. And if you can see down in there, can you see it all?
No.
No. Well, what you're looking to get out of there is a washer, first of all. Do you want to come around this side and I'll do it over here? Yeah, you can see down this side. Show the peeps what's going on. Hold the torch, there you go. Okay. With the towel in the way, I'm going to take a piece of wire. This is just a bit of coat hanger. That's all you need. A little piece of coat hanger with a hook one end and a straight hook the other end. Just to get, first of all, there's a washer. So reach down inside, have a grope round, and it's in the oil so you won't see it. First thing that comes out is a washer. Get that out of the way. Get your towel ready because there's lots of fork oil going to come out with it. There's your washer, quite simple plate washer, like a shim, and then the spring comes out from there. And as you can see, unlike many bikes, if you've taken forks apart in the past, that is it. That's your fork spring. There's no more to it, which is quite unusual. Most bikes have a big long spring, it's nearly 2 foot long, but not on the Bonneville. That's it. I'm going to dry all this off, get it on the bench, and we can get the next bit done. Right, okay. Now, I'm going to measure the difference between the two. Obviously there's a 30mm difference between those two, and you can't cut the spring, but you can cut this piece of pipe, and all that is a bit of exhaust pipe, a little piece of mild steel tubing. And best way to do it, I'll use some marks on the bench, and we'll put the spring on the base there. So we're going to take this base, that's at the top of the damper rod inside the fork, which we haven't seen, it's down and deep in the oil. That's that there. We then have the spacer, and on top, or the shim, then the spacer on top, and that takes us to this mark here. Now obviously if I just hold that in place and swap the old spring for this new progressive one and move it along until it's dead on this mark on the bench, almost like using the bench as a bit of a jig, you can see that it takes us past the original point by this much. Now that's, if we just measure that, it's better. That's roughly where we are. So that's the difference in length of the two springs, and if we measure that with the on ruler, that's 30mm difference. And the easiest way, the simplest and easiest way to deal with it is to come there. We need to take off, now bring it to there neatly. There's 30mm. That's the amount you cut off if you want the bike to stay at the same ride height. However, what I want to do, if possible, is drop it by another ½ inch. So I'm going to put another benchmark there, ½ inch in, and then take the mark on the tube and come back another ½ inch there. So that mark is where we're going to cut. Now the reason I'm taking, I want to drop the front of the bike by approximately an inch, which is quite a lot, it's quite a severe amount, but I'm not sure it's going to work. I'm not sure it's going to be too much. So just to start with, I'm going to take ½ inch, and that means taking the 30mm off that I need to take, and another 15mm or 12.5, which is ½ inch, and lob it off there. And the easiest way to do that is just run a disc through it. Okay, so I'm going to set it up in the bench, in the vise, ready to cut, and then we'll get it shorter, make a nice job of it. And that, a nice straight cut, nice and 90 degrees. There you go. Yours now is 90 degrees and it stands up straight. You're right. Well done! Sorry, I should get Penny some Amplivox. Who remembers Amplivox at the range? Okay. Right, very carefully, with carefully angled strokes, about 30 degrees, take the burr off that you've produced, but don't chamfer the end too much. It's important that this stays completely 90 degrees and square, because if it's cockeyed, what it'll do is press down on the spring and cause the spring to then rotate. So what you'll get inside the fork, if there's a a tube on top of that that's got a cockeyed base on it, it'll do that to the spring, which means that the spring will rub inside the fork leg, and that will cause binding. Long term, it will cause problems with filings getting in the oil, which will bung everything up, so it's not good. That absolutely has to be straight. So there's a little bit of time when you've done it. I mean, if you're lucky enough to have access to a lathe or another way of straight cutting it, then by all means use it. Use what works for you, but I don't, so it's just a case of taking your time. And then with the half round file, do the same on the inside. Bear in mind, this goes inside the fork, and as it goes inside, it mustn't have any burrs on it because they'll catch on the fork leg. And then inside. And a really important point is that obviously you've cut this, and this is going to go, again, as I just said, it's going to go inside your fork leg, and it sits, the bottom 2 inches of it sit immersed, submerged even, in the oil. So just give it a pull through at the end, make sure that you're not going to get any of those filings stuck inside it, contaminating your oil. Just clean it out like that, bit of a pull through. There we are, job's good. Okay, now measuring that now, we just come back to the jig, just pinch a bit, and that on the end there. Washer in place, spacer in place. There we are. So we've come down by the 30mm, which brings us back to the full length. Obviously brings us back to the length of this one, which is as it should be, and at the same time I've come off by another 12.5mm, or in old money, there we are, ½ inch. So exactly ½ inch shorter, there to there, off that rod. Now, if I want to take another bit off later on, if I want to take an inch off, I can, but obviously you can't weld it back on, and trying to find that tube, that exact size, that length is a pain in the backside. You're better off if you do it right in the first place. So little and often, or not little and often, what's the term?
You need a new Delboy's dictionary.
A Delboy's dictionary. If anybody's got any contributions to Delboy's dictionary, and I don't just mean sod off monkey boy, I've got plenty of those already. You can forward them in the comments box below. Right, let's get it back together. Right, put it back together, ever so easy. Get a bit of wire, try and lower it down, try and be a little bit considerate. Pop the spacer on. This is one thing in your hands at a time. Okay, when you put these progressive springs in, always put the progressively wound bit to the top. It's because the weight comes down from the top, the weight doesn't push up from underneath, so that's where you're going to get that sensitive movement, those little tiny movements where that bit of the spring is where your special bit is. That's going to do that smoothing out of the bike as you ride along. And if you look at the back, incidentally, we've got the same thing going on with the shocks. You've got this progressively tight wound bit at the top and then wider wound at the bottom, so you're matching the front to the back. That's what you're really doing here, as well as lowering it. Anyway, stop waffling, get on with it. There's the washer, pop it on top of the spring, tightly wound bit at the top, hook, pop it in and just lower it into place. It lowers down into the oil, and all the aim of this little hook is to get it down there gently, plop, there it goes, and it sits in. Can I borrow that? Mm-hmm. Can you see down in there?
Oh.
Can you see down in?
You just wanna, yeah.
Just make sure that sits neatly on top like that. It's nicely seated on top of the spring, and it's not sitting up like a penny. And then, see what I did there? Do you like that?
I saw that.
That's cool, isn't it? Okay, and when you put this back in, the top of the cap bears on this perfect section at the top that you haven't cut. The section that you've cut, unless you've cut this on a lathe, now I've cut that and I'd say that's pretty much bang on. It stands up right on the bench, but it is the cut end. So I'm going to pop the cut end down inside. As much, just giving myself every chance, because where that bears on that I want absolute contact. Some bikes, when you take this off, there'll be a washer in there, but there isn't one in this. This is what came from the factory. And obviously, as you can see, there's no pressing down because we've lowered it. But when this goes in, it does make contact. There we are. And do them up, there you are, job done. 7/8 is exactly the same size, 22mm, whatever. Now, there, if I just come on there, I'll do that again. When you're coming around with this, it's nice and loose, then all of a sudden, donk, it stops dead. Now there is a torque setting for these, and I forget what it is. I've never in my life ever torqued them up. In fact, the more important point is not to do them up tight, because there's a big spring on them underneath, and that big spring's pushing up all the time. And they have never in my life have I ever had these come undone. But you know the drill, folks. Little dot and mark paint on the back of them, and I'll keep an eye if they've moved. They do not move ever. There's about 3/4 of an inch of very fine thread with a rubber seal. As long as the rubber seal's in, the whole lot's seated, then that's fine. And after that, in case of bolting the bars back in. Now, I'm not going to bolt these back in super tight at the minute, because we're going to be changing the bars in the fullness of time any road up. But for now, pop them back in so we can move the bike around. Okay, right, now I'm not going to go on any more about these. Quite simply, that was the simplest task you could perform, wasn't it? Think about it. All you got to do, take the cap off, pull them out, cut the spacer tube down to the relevant length, and then put them all back in after you've done this. Now I've done just a quick final thing on these. Take a look in on these since last night. I've adjusted 10mm of preload on that, and that doesn't change the height. There's still 310mm between the centres, but it does give the spring a little bit more beef, because we're going to run these in. You have to run them in. Remember, all the springs now, all 4 springs that hold this bike up are brand new springs. When you get your bike from the factory, it's sat somewhere in warehouses, in concessionaires and dealerships for sometimes many months, so those springs will have sagged. We've put all these on and we've measured them. The backs are about 5mm longer than they're supposed to be, or than they say they are. They're 315mm, but they will sag that 5mm. They'll bed in, everything will settle down. Same for these fork springs. At the moment I've only cut that 1/2 inch because I'm not sure if they're going to sag, drop, settle down, and I wouldn't want them too short. So once everything's done, take it for a little test ride and give it a good 50 to 100 miles before you start worrying about anything, unless of course it's unrideable, then you've made a mistake. So there we are, fork springs. That's the next thing. That leaves one more job, just the exhaust, eh Pen?
It is.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Now we can get the thing on the ground and Penny can reach the ground with her little feet.
I need it ready for Friday.
Need it ready for Friday. Okay, time of recording this, what is it? 6:30?
Wednesday.
Wednesday night. Right, there we go folks, thanks for that. Appreciate you watching. If you've got any questions, stick it in the comments box. Ride safe, and we will see you for the next one.